is Josalyn Tresvant, and I proudly teach at Knight Road Elementary School in Memphis, Tennessee for Shelby County Schools. I'm not going to talk to you today about what I've accomplished in my classroom or in my career. Instead, I'm going to talk to you about my secret to teaching, and that it's not figuring out what works, it's about figuring out what doesn't work. I spend most of my time thinking about not what did I do right, but what could I do differently to help my students. On a daily basis, I'm thinking to myself, what was it about that lesson that Derek had a problem understanding? How can I convince Marlo that reading is not so boring and difficult? The fact of the matter is, I fail in my teaching on a regular basis. And that's okay, because if I fail, I can rebound and regroup. But if my students fail, it's not nearly as easy for them to rebound and regroup. There will always be another opportunity, another path for me to take, but not for them. This is especially true when you work with students who have learning disabilities. The students I've worked with over the past 4 years are typically 3 to 4 years below grade level of their peers. And sometimes that's in reading and also in math. Yet despite being below their peers, they still have to demonstrate proficiency of the same standards. The expectations put on these children are enormous. This is what drives me to push myself as their teacher, which means I must constantly think critically about what I'm doing. If I create some grand activity that makes me look like a rock star, but my students don't learn anything and they don't improve, then what is the point? They trust me to do what works for them. So if a strategy is not helping them learn, then I just simply have to use a different one. Now, I know it seems like I'm saying I'm the only one responsible for my students' success. And to be honest with you, the onus most of the time feels like that. But as a teacher, my role is that as the instructor and an advocate. I have to both teach my students what they need and also advocate for what's in their best interest. Because those high expectations should not be placed solely on their shoulders, I have to hold myself to those same high expectations. What sobers me and convinces me is that this work is bigger than any achievement test. It's bigger than my classroom. Their future is in my hands. In practice, reflective teaching isn't just a process of elimination of what you're doing wrong or random experimentation, but it is simply being honest in your assessment of what you are doing. When I taught that lesson and that student acted out, did I stop and correct his misbehavior and then lose the interest of the rest of my class? Did I even consider the possibility that there may be behavior problems when I delivered this lesson? And perhaps, most importantly, did I ask my students what they liked and what they feel they need? Now, I've read what many experts will tell you about teaching students in high-need schools, but nothing beats the insight I gain from simply asking my students. In fact, after every lesson, I have them tell me what they liked and what they would have changed. I'll ask them, if you could control this classroom and the lessons I designed, what would you include? And surprisingly, they'd never say we would have popcorn and ice cream every day. Now, I'll admit this isn't the only unorthodox strategy that I've used. For example, over the past year, I've become addicted to using video in my classroom. Not music videos, but videos of myself. I like to think that I have a photographic memory, but that's just not my reality. The video allows me to actually really see what happened in my class. Initially, I just wanted to use it as a tool to critique myself. I wanted to see my tone, my body language, my rapport with my students. It's a pretty literal kind of reflection to just watch yourself teach. But then I also started to notice my students and what they were doing while I was teaching. And often I found what I thought they were doing or how they were learning wasn't really the case. For example, I may have thought Takira was hanging on my every word, yet she had this puzzled look on her face, which also allowed me to see the actual moment that I'd lost her. She was going through the motions, yet she really had not grasped what I was trying to help her discover. That helped me know I have to plan some fall-proof checks for Takira every day. Surprisingly, a lot of my reflective teaching is drawn from my previous career in banking and finance, which often helped others achieve some things that some would consider impossible. One of the last roles I had before I left the bank was that I served as a sales and marketing officer, and I had to help branch managers reach their annual sales and deposit goals. And a huge amount of my time was spent advising and coaching them, helping them break down their annual goals down to smaller, manageable pieces so they could track growth towards reaching their goal, and sometimes strategize when they were not on track to meet those expectations. So, naturally, this banker took data tracking into her classroom, which has become a way for my students to directly review the improvements they're making and identify what gaps exist. Are they meeting their weekly goals? If so, what helped them to do so? Was it a class activity? Was it their determination, or grit and grind, as we like to call it? Or was it simply coming to after-school tutoring? And if they're not meeting their goals, what are they going to do to make that change? These goals I develop in class are both collective and individual. At the beginning of each year, we would set a goal as a class, and then that's followed with me meeting with each student individually so they can determine their individual goal they would need to meet in order to help the entire class reach its goal. Helping my students connect their behavior and actions to the progress they could make to a class's goal is invaluable. It seemed to be an empowering process for them to be able to track and analyze their own data and feel like their individual success was integral and important for the class's success. Now, each week, I track each class's progress in relation to the percentage of students that demonstrated proficiency of that week's objectives. The overall goal is 100%. That means every student demonstrates proficiency, but yet we look each week to see that percentage grow, to help ensure that we're on track. The percentage of students who are mastering those objectives, to watch that grow. And ultimately, by the end of that quarter, and ultimately at the end of that school year. Now, a little friendly competition doesn't hurt either. Since I teach 3 sections of 5th graders this year, I let each section try to beat the goal. And that simply means they're competing to be the section with the most growth. Last week, it was funny to see Lakira and Tariko come into class, and they were discussing how it looked like 501, which is their homeroom, was tied with 503 on last week's test. And believe me, when I tell you, having your students talk about class before class even starts is like the unicorn of teaching. When I started teaching at my school, my students had no interest in improving their performance, let alone working with me. This reminds me of Marcus. Marcus was in 3rd grade and had just transferred to my school. One day when we were working in our guided reading group, he looked at me and stated in a matter-of-fact manner, "I don't have to do work, I'm in resource." Resource is a label students give themselves if they receive instructional resource support from a special education teacher. After which, I had a meeting with Marcus to let him know that while he would receive support because of his learning disability, he still had to learn and demonstrate what he had learned as a 3rd grader. I can even remember his face and him looking at me after I told him my expectations for his growth and how that would only benefit him. He looked at me as if I was speaking another language. What does that say about Marcus's reflection of himself? For the students with learning disabilities that I served, they were diagnosed with specific learning disabilities, which primarily impacted their reading levels. Putting them further behind their peers not only fostered a low sense of self-esteem, but it was also coupled with low expectations from some teachers because of their disability. they began to feel like they don't have to do anything. They're not smart. So what is the use of them investing any effort in class or school? We have to recognize that for so many of these kids, this isn't about them not having interest in learning. It's that they don't believe they have the capacity to. The depth of the impact on these kids' perception of themselves can be debilitating, when the truth is they inspire and teach me every day. This is why it's our responsibility to create a positive reflection of these beautiful young people, to help them mirror the potential that's inside of them. When I think of Takira, she brings this to light for me. She was another student that adamantly felt she did not have to do anything in class. After some reflection and high expectations from me, along with her homeroom teacher, she began to blossom. She went from sitting quietly in class and not engaging in lessons to raising her hand to share responses. She was even tickled pink when she learned of her test scores the following spring. I said, Takira, how did you feel about your score? She said, oh, I knew I would get this. Y'all made school easy this year. Which was really funny, because in actuality, she had engaged in some pretty complex reading and math. But her confidence was affirmation that reflecting on those fall-proof checks for Takira helped prepare her and empower her to really show what she knew. It helped her because she could see a version of herself that was capable and worthy of not only those scores, but her success. That she was able to see and be her best self. This is what inspires me to endure the daily struggle. It's those moments of change that make me a better teacher. Now, this year, I am the 5th grade English language arts teacher for my school. So I am solely responsible for the English language arts instruction for all 68 5th graders at my school. My school and administrators are depending on me to have all these students proficient on state assessments. Their parents are expecting me to fix every gap their child has with reading. And my students expect me to keep my promise. My promise to them is that they will all fall in love with reading this school year. Here you see a younger picture of me. I shared this picture with my students and the story of how I fell in love with reading when I was in 2nd grade, after I read Charlotte's Web and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now, my promise is that I plan to work diligently to those first 2 commitments, to my school and to my parents. Yet it is my mission to keep that promise to my students. Who knows how many missteps will get me there, but I can't wait to see what I learn in the meantime. Thank you.